Hey, it's Jay. I wanted to extend a special thanks to those of you who have listened and left reviews on iTunes for this podcast. Please leave a review if you haven't done so already. We sincerely appreciate it. We're producing this show independently, and unfortunately, that is not free. We have to pay for digital hosting space, software, equipment, websites, and travel out of our own pockets. But we'd love to keep this show going as long as possible. Pledge your support by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/pledge. Thanks for your support and enjoy the show. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by ScentLock Enforcer, episode number 183. Hal Blood, Big Woods Bucks, tracking Maine's monster whitetail. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by the ScentLock Enforcer, Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is Craig Meyer from Plano Synergy, and you're about to push play on my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry, Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is Dr. Dave Samuel, and you're about to push play on one of the most informative Big Buck podcasts out there, Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
My name's Steve Pass, and I'm a deer hunter from Pennsylvania, and you're about to push play on my favorite deer hunting podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
Welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. My name is Jay, and I'm joined by my good friend and traveling companion, Dusty Phillips. Dusty, what's going on?
Oh, man, just reminiscing, what happened last week, and wow, SHOT Show.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, SHOT Show's been amazing. We're as this is airing, we're hanging out in the airport in Vegas, waiting for our flights to take off, so you can get back to Ohio, Jim can get back to Michigan, and I can get back to New Hampshire. And we can come back and do this all again on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast so that you, as you listen to the show, can tune in and digest the best deer hunting advice from the best deer hunters in America so that you can add it to your repertoire and you can do it too. So, Dusty, now that we're about to jump on the flight, one of the places that we've had a lot of requests to go to is more New England hunting strategies. And we found our good friend Hal Blood, who's up in Jackman, Maine. And if you know who Hal is, he is one of those legendary tracking guys that needs, or doesn't need snow, but likes snow to track big bucks in the deepest big buck woods of Maine. And then you can actually find a lot about Hal on bigwoodbucks.com. He's got a book coming out. Hal's been a friend of ours for quite some time. We wanted to go back there. We wanted to learn how Hal goes about tracking big bucks in the big buck woods of Maine. So that's what we're doing today. But before we turn to Hal, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week, update on the official scoring of a 312-plus world record non-typical buck. This story was originally featured on the deeranddeerhunting.com website and was written by Alan Clemens. Stephen Tucker is one step closer to having his name and gnarly 47-point buck enshrined in the record books as the world record. If you remember from our previous story, Tucker, 26 of Gallatin, Tennessee, shot the buck last November while hunting on the opening morning of Tennessee's muzzleloading season. He missed his first shot at the giant due to a misfire, then he saw it again that afternoon, but it was too far away for him to take, in his view, an ethical shot. 2 days later, the monster buck came within 40 yards and Tucker connected. The giant has 47 points and gross scored 313 2/8 inches on the first unofficial measurement. Net score at the time was 308 3/8, which put it a hair above the non-typical world record Tony Lovestoon buck that scored 307 5/8. Lovestones killed his giant buck in Albia, Iowa in 2003. Then came the hard part for Tucker after killing his buck and getting the unofficial score, waiting for the mandatory 60-day drying period before it could be officially panel scored for the Boone & Crockett Club record books. That 2-month waiting ended Monday, and Tucker's buck was finally put under the rigorous measuring criteria by certified Boone & Crockett scorers. The final score, an astounding 312 3/8, which means the whitetail world record has a new non-typical king. All that remains now is official certification by the Boone & Crockett Club at the organization's 2019 conference. There, 2 more Boone & Crockett judges will score the buck again. Barring any changes, Tucker's buck is the new king and nudges ahead of the Lovestone buck that has held the top spot for 13 years. Tennessean outdoor editor Mike Organ reported that the scoring took 4 hours to complete and Tucker was allowed to watch the proceedings. His buck also is a new Tennessee record. Tucker's buck easily shattered the 17-year-old Tennessee record held by Dave Wachtel. It scored 256 gross and 244 3/8 net. The buck was aged 3.5 years old and weighed 150 pounds. Tucker was hunting on private land. Man fined nearly $10,000 for shooting a deer in his driveway. This story was originally featured on the WIBR.com website. A Jefferson County man's decision to illegally kill a buck meant a hefty fine under recently changed legislation. Clarence Robertson, 63, of Newmarket, was ordered this week to pay nearly $10,000 for the trophy buck he illegally shot in his driveway. According to the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, Robertson shot the 11-point from his driveway and across Piedmont Road in a hayfield where he did not have permission on November 24th. He then drove his truck into the field to retrieve the deer. On Tuesday, Robertson pled guilty to shooting a deer across a public road and on property where he didn't have permission. The judge imposed a $50 fine, $269 in court costs, and a restitution of $9,250 for the trophy buck. Recently amended legislation allows for a judge to impose enhanced restitution fees for illegally killed or possessed trophy deer. For white-tailed deer with at least 8 but not more than 10 antler points, the fine is $1,000 per animal plus $500 for each antler point. For a white-tailed deer with 11 or more antler points, the fine is $1,000 per animal plus $750 for each antler point. TWRA wildlife biologist Sterling Daniels measured the antlers, giving a gross score of 143 6/8 inches. It's probably the biggest buck I've ever seen in Jefferson County, said Jefferson County Wildlife Officer Wayne Rich. While the total score of the antlers didn't matter, the number of antler points did, the TWRA release said. Robertson's hunting privileges are suspended until he pays the fines and restitution. Authorities returned the firearm to the owner. The Jefferson County High School FFA Hunters for the Hungry Club paid for the deer to be processed and donated the meat to charity. Authorities returned the hide and antlers to the property owner where the deer was killed. Florida senator seeks federal funding as screwworm spreads to Florida mainland. This story was originally featured on the PalmBeachPost.com website and was reported by Susan Salisbury. Senator Bill Nelson, Democrat from Florida, Wednesday called for the federal government to step up its response to the New World screwworm infestation that has spread to the Florida mainland. If we don't move aggressively to halt the spread of this dangerous pest, the result could be catastrophic for Florida's wildlife and livestock industry, Nelson wrote in a letter to Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack and Interior Secretary Sally Jewell. More than 130 endangered key deer have already fallen victim to the screwworm. We cannot allow the white-tailed deer population or the endangered Florida panther or Florida's nearly $1 billion beef industry to collapse too. Nelson says he wants the federal government to provide additional funding to better monitor and contain the screwworm spread. State and federal officials said Wednesday they plan to release sterile flies Saturday in the Homestead area to combat the spread of the flesh-eating New World screwworm. A stray dog found there December 19th tested positive for the fly larva. It's the first confirmed case of a screwworm on the Florida mainland. The maggots can infest livestock and other warm-blooded animals, including people in rare cases. They most often enter an animal through an open wound and feed on the animal's living flesh. Screwworm was first confirmed on October 3, 2016, in key deer from the National Key Deer Refuge on Big Pine Key, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and U.S. Department of Agriculture officials said. To date, 133 deer have been found or have been euthanized, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reported. reports. The public is asked to report dead, injured, or sick deer by calling the Key Deer hotline at 305-470-6863, extension 7. Residents who have warm-blooded animals, that is, pets or livestock, should watch their animals carefully and report any potential cases to 1-800-HELP-FLA or 1-800-435-7352. Non-Florida residents should call 850-410-3800. Visitors to the area should ensure any pets that are with them are also checked in order to prevent the spread of the infestation. More information can be found at freshfromflorida.com/screwworm. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Without further ado, here's Hal Blood.
Hal Blood, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, and you?
I like the way you say "and you." It sounds like you're from Maine, which I know you're from Maine. That's
I can't hide that, can I?
No, and you? Yeah. Classic greeting, as a Mainer would say. Well, I'm glad you joined us, and I got to be honest, Hal, we've had a lot of requests from a lot of our fan base that are more or less located in the New England states, and they want to know more about deer hunting in New England. A lot of these folks are newer hunters or haven't gotten to that level of hunting that we know guys like yourself have achieved, and they want to know more about how to do more of that tracking style of hunting, that big woods where you can just get lost all day long and it wouldn't matter as long as you find a deer at the end. And
right.
You've been doing this your whole life.
Well, pretty much, but I started hunting in southern Maine. I grew up in southern Maine, but yeah, I've been hunting all my life. I mean, my father started taking me deer hunting when I don't know, 6, 7 years old. I'd follow him around with my toy gun, but I started hunting in the big woods up north a year after I got out of the Marine Corps. So my first trip north would have been in 1980. So it's been 36 years now I've been hunting up here.
Gotcha. When you were growing up, and you hunted in the south part of Maine, was the style the same?
No. It's kind of ironic. In a way, it's the same because when I grew up back in the 60s, early 70s down south, there wasn't very many deer in southern Maine, especially, like along the coastal part. It was, pretty sparse with deer. It was, the success rates weren't that high. And back then, most of the deer were up north. The big woods had a lot of deer wintering areas, and it hadn't been, cut over the second time around. So a lot of hunters headed north to deer hunt, but I never did. But we hunted. It was basically, it was woods hunting. I never really hunted around farms or anything growing up, but I know I can remember there weren't very many deer. It was always a big deal, get your deer, it was always a saying, and so we had to figure out, how to find them and find places to sit or whatever we did. And that's basically, my father was kind of a sitter, he puttered around some too, but he wasn't a tracker or anything like that. But
yeah.
I got the basics out of it, getting into the woods, and then I just always took an interest in everything in the woods. And when we had snow in the winter, I'd follow, me and my buddies when we were kids, we'd track rabbits around with our 22s and shoot them. We'd holler, and so they'd know where each of us were at. And we'd kind of track the rabbits around like beagling them and shoot them that way. But it was good practice for tracking,
Sure.
And we didn't have a lot of snow during deer season, and of course in southern Maine, once in a while I remember it, but
right.
It wasn't until going up north where we had snow where the tracking got more intriguing to me,
Gotcha.
I had read about it back when I was a teenager. Larry Benoit's first book come out about tracking there, and I was kind of intrigued about it. So, when I first headed north, anytime there was snow, I'd try it,
Gotcha. What drew you to the north? Was it the book itself that you read that said, I need to do more of this, and the place where I need to go to do this style of hunting is up north because that's where the snow flies more readily?
It was a combination of things. when I first got out of the Marine Corps, I had got a job. I just got married, so I needed to get a job, and I took a job in the Hannaford warehouse.
Yep.
And that first year, I was, I didn't have any seniority, so I couldn't get a week's vacation for deer season.
Gotcha.
So back then, there was there was only two zones for deer hunting. There was a northern and a southern zone. And the northern zone opened a week earlier. There was 3 weeks in the south and then an extra week in the north, and it opened a week early. So I said, well, I'll take that week and I'll go up north. Now, I had been going north fishing. We used to come north up to this Jackman area with some relatives every Memorial on a fishing trip. So I knew about the north, and I knew about coming up. So it just made sense to me. I always saw deer and deer tracks and stuff. So I said, well, I'll go up there deer hunting,
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the first year I went, I was hooked on it. I lost interest in hunting in southern Maine anymore because it was a combination of, I think, that big woods I was just drawn to it, where you never saw any other hunters. I mean, not that there was a lot of deer, but there was enough deer, and if there was snow, there was always tracks to follow, and so I just got drawn into it. And so from then on, that's when I only worked there one more year, and I took another vacation, and then I started my own business lobstering, moved down the coast a little bit, and I took some time when I could then and go. I'd take a week if I could, but then it got to be I just really had to focus on making the money, so I'd go a few days here and a few days there, but it was always to the north. Then we'd drive. It was about a 3-hour drive from where I lived down there up to Jackman here, and that's where I hunted from then on, and then decided when I started my lobstering business, I had a 10-year plan to move north and guide and run a sporting camp. Back then, I was already drawing my plans for it because I just wanted to be in the woods. That's how I wanted to make my living, I guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you get up to Jackman, Maine, and why did you pick that particular location?
Well, I picked it because that's where I knew, I guess, I'd say, because I did look around. I mean, I knew this area a little bit from coming up fishing, so I knew this area. And then I did look at, when I started looking at having a sporting camp, I did look at some properties, and then I looked at some actual land to build places, and I actually went different parts of the state looking around, and I wanted it to be a year-round business too. So Jackman is a real year-round business with the fishing, the summer, and the hunting, and then the snowmobiling in the winter. And
Gotcha.
I just felt it would be a better place to try to make a living at it. Some of the places in northern and eastern Maine, they kind of, after deer seasons, things kind of slow down.
Right.
So that's kind of why I chose it. But I knew it, and I liked it here. So I guess it was just a natural place to start out. So
Sure.
We bought the land up here in 1988. We found a piece of land we wanted to build on and started building our sporting camp.
Gotcha. Tell me about the terrain where you are. What is it like? If you had to describe it to somebody that lives not here, what does it look like and smell like and feel like?
Well, it's mountainous up here. It's really kind of like the northern end of what you'd call the White Mountains or the Appalachians. They kind of end right here. They come up through New Hampshire and cross over into Maine, western Maine, and up through Rangeley and Eustis and here. And then when you get north of here, it kind of turns into more like rolling hills and a few smaller mountains once in a while here.
Okay.
But and we're right on the Canadian border, the Quebec border up here, so that's a high elevation. But there's also, there's the valley in town. It's called the Moose River Valley here, and so there's a lot of low ground and swamp down in the bottoms too. And so it's a pretty good mixture. It's about 50-50, conifers forest, spruce fir, and half hardwood forest, real good mix.
Yep. Gotcha. So let's talk about the style of hunting a little bit. I'm curious to find out, what goes through your mind when you decide, where to hunt, and then what do you do once you get there? What's your strategy?
If there's snow, I'm just going to strike off into the woods and try to find the track I'm looking for, a big square-toed track. And what I'll usually do is if I go into an unfamiliar area, I will usually cut a great big circle. I'll say I'll strike off in a certain direction I might say I'm going to go a mile or 2 miles or whatever I decide, and then I'll start cutting a big arc circle in it, and that will be my hunt for the day.
Okay.
Usually you'll find a track doing that. Usually always find a track. For me, it's a matter of if it's a track I want to follow,
Gotcha.
Big enough to follow. But that's what I'll do, going into an area unfamiliar. But and I've done that often enough. But usually I'm hunting. Most of my bucks I've shot in Maine have been right within 20 miles of home here, And since I've been hunting here for 30-something years, I know pretty much every inch of it,
Right. Do you think that's an advantage? Like, should you know the area that you're hunting and just spend more time there knowing it? Is that better than going to places unknown?
Well, it's always better if you know, where there's several bucks hanging around or traveling through or whatever, because then your odds are already up for finding a track, I'll go and check signpost rubs or whatever. I know where they are. So, yeah, that's an advantage. But you have to still keep tabs on that from year to year, because as they log, everything changes. Where there's deer one year, and they might not be there the next. They might have moved a half a mile or a mile with some new logging, and then the bucks have their own area, but then they'll divert the way they travel. So you've always got to keep an eye on that. And as they log, it makes good feed, but then after 5 or 6 years, it's beyond their reach, so then it goes the other way, so then the deer move out of there, and, so it's just a matter of, you still got to scout and keep tabs on them.
Gotcha.
But if not, a couple of years, I had 2 years in a row, not this year, but the year before, it'd be 2013 and 2014 and 15, I had to go over in the northeast part of the state to get the snow,
Right. Gotcha.
And both times I went into areas I'd never been in my life, but shot bucks there,
Gotcha. Okay. When you get into areas that you know, or even areas that you don't know, what goes through your mind when you're trying to decide which track to follow? It sounds like you're on foot. It doesn't sound like you're doing a whole lot of time in a truck driving around looking for a track. It sounds like you're actually in the woods to start. And what's going through your head when you're looking for that track?
Just covering ground. I got to cover as much ground as I can until I find a track, and I'll do it systematically. Like I say, I might cut across a certain ridge. I'll have looked at the map and know kind of generally what the terrain is like. So I might run one ridge for however long it goes. I might cut over the ridge to the other side. I might follow a stream for a mile or so to see if one is crossed somewhere.
Okay.
And I'm just going. My whole mission then is just to cover some ground. I'm not poking around. I'm not really looking for deer. I'm looking for a track. And if I see sign along the way, that's great. But it's just basically walking about as fast as I can walk through the woods.
Interesting. All right. So it's kind of a brisk walk. And let's say you come across a track you like. What decides the difference between the track you like and the track you're going to just let go?
The ones I like are the ones that I figure the bucks are those old, bucks that are 6, 7, 8 years old,
Yep.
or more.
Yep. And
their feet start to get a little more splayed and rounded, and obviously, usually the print itself is bigger.
Yep.
They'll have typically a longer stride, and then the distance from right to left, I call it the stance. Some people call it the stagger. Between the side to side, between the tracks, broadens out when they get big and old. I like to see those out, from 8 to 12 inches apart.
Okay.
Is a big one. Big bucks or old bucks will drag their feet even in like an inch of snow. You might only have just a dust or an inch of snow. If you see where they're dragging their feet in the beginning of the season especially, those are the old bucks. Those are the ones I call the old toe draggers.
Gotcha.
So that's what I'm looking for now. And then the other group of bucks is, I call them the either-ors. There'll be tracks that I think they're around a 200-pound buck, because, probably everybody's heard in Maine, the gold standard is like a 200-pound buck, and it's, they got the biggest bucks in Maine club if you shoot one that dresses over 200. So,
yep.
So then there's kind of a guideline there. I'll look at a track, and there's a whole group of tracks that I look at, and I'm like, it's about a 200-pounder. I call it either or. It might weigh 190, might weigh 210, but it's right around a 200-pound buck. And those are fine. I mean, I might take one of those in the beginning and hoping it'll take me to something bigger.
Yep.
Especially early in the season, I'll try to get on a bigger one if I think I'm going to have plenty of track and snow, because we're only allowed one, so I'm going to try to get the biggest one I can find.
Sure.
Towards the end of the season, and I start maybe not going to be quite as fussy about it. If it's got a good set of antlers, I'd probably shoot one of those like I have in the last few years. That's what I've ended up with, ones right around 200,
Yep.
And so, yeah, just that's what I'm looking for, And then the other ones are from there down, are the younger deer, the 2.5, 3.5-year-old bucks. I don't bother with those, If I did, that would be just thinking it might take me to something else. I wouldn't be following it thinking I'm going to shoot at it. But bucks will always cross paths. There's certain places that their ranges overlap, so if they're checking does, different bucks will go through that same doe group, So I know anytime you follow a buck track, especially, I mean, it could be a doe track, but especially a buck track, it's always going to take you to more deer, because that's what they do. They go looking for more deer, does, the does. So by following a track, you'll get to some more deer. You'll find deer that you never would have found probably without following the track. He's also going to take you to little hideouts and places where his signpost rubs are or whatever. So just tracking when you're learning about an individual buck, that's what's neat about it.
That's an interesting point right there. Very, very good. Do you, when you're out trailing a buck, do you have a time frame? I mean, how long does it usually take you to catch up with one? Is there an average time that you kind of figure it'll happen?
No, it depends when you get on it. I mean, when, if you hopefully, I'm hoping I'm always can get on one, say by 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm hoping I'm on a track. If it's been a new snow in the night, I've gone all day and never cut a track before. If it's on a new snow, they haven't laid tracks down yet. But I'm hoping by 8 o'clock I can get on one. And if you're lucky, you get on one that's made at 4 o'clock in the morning, not 4 in the afternoon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'll take any track that was made in the night, and you just got to realize if you took one that's older, froze up, made early in the night, you're probably going to have a long ways to go to catch up. Yeah. So I just pour the coals on and move quickly along, and however many miles I go, I cover it. I don't think there is an average, really.
Okay. So you're analyzing the track itself to decide how long it's been since it had passed, and you're determining whether or not it was a night track from a recent track in the last hour or so. And tell us a little bit more about how you decide what the timing of that track is.
Well, you have to. It's almost like having a little computer in your mind as far as to compute out the temperature and time for the age of that track, because any track you'll find eventually it's going to get into some water. The ground is usually wet underneath. I mean, up in this country, there's water everywhere. They're going to step through a little stream. They're going to step in water eventually. Yep. And then you get an idea of how frozen the track is where it comes out. And then you got to calculate that into the temperature. If it's 30 degrees, it doesn't freeze as quick if it's 0. So it's just experience, really.
Gotcha.
It's just experience.
So you're aware of the elements. You're aware of what's happened in that time frame. You're aware of the temperatures that have occurred during the time frame that you're on this track.
Yeah, you have to be.
Yeah. If
you're not, you're dead before you start. You can't really figure anything out. So I'll quite often get up in the night, especially if it's snowing or it's supposed to snow. I'll get up in the night and I'll look out to see if it started, what time it started, if it ended, when did it end, because then that tells me a lot about the next day, because I might take a track that's half full of snow. I see a big track, big punch marks in the snow, but it's half filled in, but I know the snow stopped at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. I know the track's made in the night. I'm going to take it.
Gotcha.
Most people won't do that. Most people look at a track, and if they don't think the buck just made it 10 minutes ago, they don't think it's a fresh track. To me, any track made in the night, fresh to me.
Okay. All right. So you're not real particular about the timing of it as long as it was in the last 8 hours or so, maybe
Right. We can't be as particular because, especially when you're looking to find a real big track, because there isn't, the bigger ones you're looking for are a lower percentage track to even find.
Right.
Because they travel so far. You know what I mean?
Right.
That buck track, if you pick up a buck track in a spot, he might only get through that area every 3 or 4 days. So you happen to get lucky and catch a buck track in a certain place, a big one, and it was made in the night. You better take it, because you might not ever find, you could walk all day and not find another big one like that, you know?
Gotcha.
So you can't be that fussy. If you're just looking to follow a buck track, well, it's all right. You can probably wander around and find a fresher one anytime. But if you're in the woods on a track, you're just as likely to find a fresher track following a buck as you are just wandering anywhere else, right? Because they're going to take you to some other deer.
Right.
So if I start on an old one, if I find one, and I've done it many a times, come right across the fresher track, just as big, I'll switch tracks. I don't have to stay on the one I originally got on. Or if I start on one that's a little smaller and I see a bigger one, I'm going to switch on to that. That's no problem. Still, I figure I've gained time on a fresher one, and maybe I've gained some size on the other one.
Gotcha.
I've at times I've been on a fresher, smaller one and get on an older, bigger one just because I want the bigger one, and I'll take my chances with it, you know.
Right.
Yep. It's everybody's preference, though, the way they do that.
Gotcha. So it's each man's game. It depends on how you want to play it.
What's the deer activity on a track? Is it similar? It sounds like you've tracked a lot of deer. How often do you see a lot of similarities while you're tracking a deer?
They have a lot of similarities. They're creatures of habit, and they have a way they do things. So there's a lot of similarities, and then they develop their own through their own personalities or their own. They've learned things like escaping predators. Like most people don't realize, if you're up in the North Country here, up in the big woods, you might get on a buck that a person's never tracked, but that buck has been chased by coyotes his whole life.
Right.
So he's developed an escape mechanism to avoid coyotes. So that's why he got that big, right?
Right.
Maybe bobcats too, but mainly coyotes. So whatever a buck does, or any deer for that matter, but we're talking about bucks, whatever he did to escape a coyote the first time or second time, whatever, he learned that that's how he escaped. So he'll continually do that because that's the way he learned to escape. Maybe his mother taught him that when he was a button buck. Don't know, but they seem to develop certain ways, and a lot of them, for a lot of the bucks, which is similar, is they get into water, whether it's a stream, a bog, a pond. I mean, because the coyote doesn't smell them in the water. Now, they don't know that we can look across the stream or whatever and see the track. That's not what they're thinking. They've just escaped that way.
Gotcha.
A lot of times they'll walk down like an early snow. There might be, a skidder rut in the woods might be wet, so it didn't take any snow, and you got wet snow. They'll get in a skidder rut and walk right down to the end of it and then keep going. They know what they're doing. They're walking in that water to try to shake a coyote, So that's a real similar trait for a lot of them for an escape mechanism. And the other thing they do that's similar is the bucks will, when they get ready to lay down, they'll feed around more, especially later in the season, the rut, when they're traveling more. They might nip something along the way, but usually before they're going to lay down, they'll stop and just feed around in a little small area, then go up on a little high spot, or they can look back and lay down. So those are a couple of the common things to look for.
So I wonder on that, on when they stall out and feed around a little bit, is that something that's given the opportunity that something's tailing them to catch up to them and they can make their move from there?
Yeah, they always watch their backtrack. Whatever they're going to lay down, in this country, since we've got mountains and ridges, that's typically what they do. Is they'll turn and go up on the ridge where they can look down a lot of times through the hardwoods. And if they see anything down there on their track, they might be able to see 100 yards down there. If they see something on their track, they just get up and go. So lots of times they've already gone before you even knew they turned up the hill,
Right.
But sometimes they'll just turn and go in. And when I see that feeding around, that's when I I just stop and start looking everywhere immediately around me, depending on the terrain, and then figure out where he might be laying, because that's when I'm going to start making a creep around, trying to get a look at him.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Gotcha. Now, Hal, when you say creep around, can you get into a little more detail about that? So that you've followed this for a while, that you've identified this feeding pattern, some nipping. How obvious is it? Is it a subtle thing, or is it something really?
Well, if they're just nipping along, it probably is subtle, because they don't even have to move their feet. They can just stop, as they walk along. A lot of times when deer stop, they don't move their feet. Their feet are just still in like the track will still look like it's walking, and they might just nip a bud here and a bud there. But when I talk about feeding where they're going to lay down, they'll wander over to a raspberry bush and eat on that, and they'll turn over there and they'll get some mushrooms off a tree. I mean, they're basic. You can see they're wandering and feeding. That's when they're loading up to lay down when they do that.
Okay.
So then I'll slow down, and depending on the situation, you can't always do it, but if I think they're laying down pretty close, if it's in a real thick area that's kind of flat, I'll try to get a look at them or get a shot at them when they jump up. So I just take one step at a time and just look everywhere.
Okay.
Take a step and look, take a step and look. And if it's in an area, like sometimes they'll go and they'll turn and they'll go right up a hardwood ridge, I'll just circle the whole ridge. I'll just get back up on the track and cut a big circle around, above the ridge or behind the ridge, depending on the terrain, and I'll cut a great big circle right back to my track. And if the buck didn't come out, if I don't cut the track coming out, he's captive. He's in there. Now I can plan on how I'm going to try to get a look at him, which usually involves going back up on the ridge and trying to sneak up on him from behind, because he's going to be looking down on his back track, right?
Gotcha. All right. So you still got the track on you. You know he's fed. Then you've got that track as a direction, and you decide based off the layout of what you're seeing, you do a big loop. How big is the loop?
Depends on how dense the woods are. It might be quarter of a mile or it might be 200 yards.
Okay.
It just depends. Every situation's different,
okay.
And you can't make that loop every time. The terrain has to be right.
Yeah. Where
you could actually get behind one and look back down over the ridge and get a look at them. So it's not all the time, but sometimes you can use that strategy.
Gotcha. So you do your loop, you get back to your track, and then if it didn't break out through that track.
Yeah, or quite often you make that loop around and then it keeps going, so you didn't waste any time.
Yep.
Taking a step at a time and looking. If I cut around and I cut the track coming out, I just continue on. He didn't, because it ain't 100%. Nothing's 100%,
Right.
I assume he's laying there, but he might have laid there. He might have gone up and laid there and then gone up and left again already. He might have laid 2-3 hours and he's already gone again. So I don't want to waste any time unless I know he's close.
Gotcha. All right. So
that's why I cut that circle.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So you can make a play on the circle. If he's still there, if he's not there, you picked it up on the other side wherever he popped out.
Yeah, pick it up, keep on going. I shot one that way. Well, I shot one. Been 3 years ago now that I actually shot him laying in his bed because he got up and was feeding, and he laid down again. And it was early in the season. I knew he was right there, so I just took a step at a time, and I could see him. Finally, just see his horns in the back of his head over a blowdown, about 30 yards away.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned that the deer patterns will change based off of where the logging companies have come in, and that for 5 years or so there's low browse, so it's at a level where they can feed on it. Do you pay attention to where the cuts are happening so that you can get in there in future years, like a long-term plan?
Oh, that's kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah, I always know where they're logging around in my area, but what happens when they first log an area is that's where all the other hunters want to go.
Okay.
Because usually it's more open, you can see better. The logging usually draws the does, the young deer, the young bucks, the does. And the big bucks won't hang around the other deer. They're reclusive. They're not going to hang around that. Now, they're going to come in around them when the rut starts, or they may be in one of those cuts when the leaves are on in the summer and stuff where there's more cover. But once in a cut that's fairly open, once the leaves fall off, so those bucks ain't going to stay there. They might travel through it, but they won't hang around that.
Okay.
They move back in. So I use the cuts basically. If I know there's a bunch of does there, when the rut starts, I know that's a good area to pick a track up in, because every buck around is going to go check those does at one time or another,
Right. Gotcha. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that you know that the other hunters are going to be there, and early on the big bucks aren't really going to be there. That's more or less where they might pass through during rut, but you're paying attention to future years when hunters don't pay attention to it, and that's when the big bucks start.
Yeah.
More
now
likely.
some cuts they make them in the winter, and then they pull the bridges out, or the roads are all mucked up and you can't drive in there. Now those are cuts I like to hunt around because there won't be any pressure. Most people won't walk back in them roads a few miles or a couple miles.
Okay.
So, but it's all different. Like I said, I keep tabs on it. And recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been going back to places I hunted 15 or 20 years ago that were good, and then after they logged, and then it just kind of petered out. There weren't many deer anymore. And I might go back and check a place I haven't been for 15 years and be pleasantly surprised that it's good deer hunting again. The deer moved back in, the forest has changed enough after that many years, and it's good hunting again.
Yeah, gotcha.
I keep moving around.
Hal, here's a question that always kind of perplexes me. As a tracker, you're following a track, but the wind doesn't always cooperate in the direction that you're moving. Do you care about scent and the wind and where that track is relative to where that buck is hanging out?
No, not unless I think he's laying down there. Like if I see where he's feeding and I think he's laying down. The only time I ever even bother checking the wind is if I think that buck is close, 100 yards or so, or something like that. Because the wind up here, you can't hunt with the wind. It switches 4 directions every 10 minutes anyways. It's always switching around. So the wind usually here isn't steady enough to blow your scent very far in one direction before the wind comes another way and moves it a different direction,
Gotcha. All right, so that's not a huge priority like it might be in other places, especially if you're stand hunting. It's you're kind of at the mercy of the track. The wind is going to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, quite often those bucks will put the wind right in their back and walk that way because they can smell you. You'll see where you go along, and every once in a while you see where he'll take a couple of jumps. That just means they can smell you got a little closer. They do that intentionally. They see what's ahead of them. They can smell what's behind them, and they're fine with it.
Gotcha. And you just keep going.
Just keep going. Eventually they'll have to turn somewhere.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So here's the other perplexing question: what do you do if there's no snow?
When there's no snow, I still hunt. I don't have any patience for sitting. I never did. But so I still hunt. What I call still hunting is / scouting. I'm always scouting. I'm always looking for another place, another big buck somewhere, and the sign he's laying down.
Okay.
But my still hunting is probably different than what's normal too. Still hunting people think about is they take a step or two and they look around, wait 5 minutes. I don't hunt like that unless I think I'm right close to something tells me that there's a buck right handy,
Yeah.
But when I still hunt, I basically just walk along through the woods at a normal walk, and if I get into some good sign, I'll slow down and look at it and try to figure it out. If it looks real fresh, or I think something tells me this could be something right handy, I can slow right down and just poke around and look at stuff. Well, that's how I still hunt.
Okay. And if you had to pick one, and I think I know what the answer is, snow versus no snow, would you pick snow 100% of the time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As I've got older, I've shot a lot of deer, and to me it's not about just shooting a buck. It's about shooting the one I want to shoot, and it's really about the whole challenge of the chase and outsmarting one. That's really what it's about for me. I mean, I let bucks go all the time. I wouldn't shoot one on bare ground unless it was something real super duper, I'd rather save my tag for when there's snow and I can track,
Oh, no kidding. Very interesting. Gotcha. I'd like to turn the mic over to Dusty for a little while. I'm very curious about what gear you use. I think a tracker generally is a gun hunter, and tries to be very lightweight and spends a lot of time on their feet moving around. So the actual gear that you bring into the woods with you, or the clothing that you wear, or the boots that you wear, especially in snowy, rugged terrain, is going to be a lot different than somebody that's stand hunting all afternoon where there's no snow. So I'd like to have Dusty kind of go through your setup.
What kind of clothing are you wearing when you're on one of these tracking adventures?
Wool, 100% wool, because wool is quiet. Wool is warm. Wool is breathable. Wool is naturally odor repellent. In other words, it doesn't absorb odors. I mean, you could walk through a fire and come out the other side 10 minutes later, you wouldn't smell. People don't understand that anymore. I mean, everything's all about these new man-made fabrics and fibers and all this, but there's still nothing. There's nothing that can compare to wool. And wool keeps you warm when you're wet. You fall right in the brook. I did last year. I fell right in the river over in the Adirondacks last fall, right up to my neck, and I hunted the rest of the afternoon.
Oh, no kidding.
I dumped my one boot, got full of water, and I dumped it out, put it back on, and I hunted the rest of the afternoon. When I got out in the truck, I wasn't cold, and quite frankly, I wasn't that wet anymore. I seemed to have dried back out. But you can't do that with any other type of clothing. So I've always worn wool and always will.
Yeah, I'm assuming that as far as socks and everything else, you're going with wool socks and everything.
Wool socks, yep. I wear a sock liner, like a polypropylene or something, to wick, and one pair of a heavy wool sock, and that's all I wear on my feet. And I wear the lacrosse Grange boots, the ones that aren't insulated. They're just like wearing a pair of sneakers. They're light, no insulation in them, and they're nimble. You get around, you don't catch your feet on nothing. They're not, they're real nice boots. I understand everybody can't wear that type of boot, but that's what works for me.
Right.
And there's a lot of water up here. Leather boots, a 10-inch high leather boot, you're going to have your feet wet about every day, because you can step right into almost up to your knees in a spring hole in the middle of a hardwood ridge up in this country. There's a lot of little streams and brooks you might have to cross, beaver dams. Yeah, rubber boots are the best way to go.
Gotcha. When you talk about wool clothing, let's get in. Do you layer it? Do you put something underneath a wool jacket, or how do you dress when you're heading out?
Okay, I always wear on the bottoms I'll have my wool long johns. Like I have two different weights. I've got a heavier, not that they're heavy, but I'd call them a medium. But then I have a thin pair of like a merino wool long john, and then I've got a heavier type that is like they're dual folds or cold proofs, like they're layered wool. And then my wool pants, not insulated, just regular pair of wool pants. And I used to use the Beagle pants. We had them designed some for Bigwood's model with no liners in them, because theirs always had liners. But now actually Silent Predator's making them for us. So we've got a nice set of wool. We've got our own line of wool. We call it the tracking clothes, and it's unlined wool pants and an unlined wool jacket. Because a liner doesn't let you breathe as much. It becomes too hot. So you can't wear, if you're tracking, you can't wear any insulation. You'll be done before you get started. If you start sweating, it just takes the energy out of you. So I'll wear my wool pants, and then I'll just, depending on the temperature, I adjust my upper body. Like until it gets down near 20, all I wear on the top is my long john top. Same thing, it's kind of a wool blend, a dual fold type. And then my jacket, which again is uninsulated, and that's all I wear. It's light. If you went out and stood around in the morning on a 20-degree morning, you get cold pretty quick, but when you're moving, you don't. That's the key.
Yeah,
and if it gets colder than that, I wear a light wool shirt, just a light wool shirt over it, and then I wear my jacket. And I can go that way until right down to 0 degrees. Same clothes.
Yeah, right on. All right, so we covered a little bit about it. Any particular colors that you're wearing while you're out there?
I wear the green pants, and then the green checkered jacket. It's kind of traditional look, and I've always liked it. A lot of people, the younger people don't realize that checkered wool was the original camo. Everybody thinks is the camo they have now, you need to wear it, but you don't. But that was the original camo, was checkered wool. But I like the green. Some people like the red checked. I don't think it makes any difference, especially to the deer, I don't think they see it as a color. They see it as a dark object,
Yeah, I don't think that they discriminate on what kind of apparel that you're wearing. They're not quite up to date on that.
I think probably if you had, with the snow on the ground, if you were head to toe fluorescent orange, they probably wouldn't see her as good as they do with a dark color on. But it doesn't matter. You can't rely on what you're using for your gear to overcome the deer's senses. You got to rely on your tactics, your strategies, and your savviness.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Do you carry any kind of backpack with you when you go out?
Not a backpack. I carry a belt pack. A backpack you can't duck in. When you're tracking, you're constantly ducking in underneath limbs, blowdowns, lots of stuff like that. If you got a pack on your back, you're going to be snapping sticks, and you've got to duck down lower. And so I just wear a wool belt pack that's big enough to carry some necessities. And what I call necessities are things like I always carry, an extra compass in there, some dragging rope, a little flashlight, 2 ways to start a fire. I got waterproof matches. I got a Bic lighter, extra batteries for my GPS or flashlight or whatever, just little double A's. Everything, just something simple. I carry a little space blanket, always got a few candy bars, chocolate bars in there, and then my lunch and my camera. And basically that's all I have in. All that stuff weighs, even with my lunch, I don't know, maybe 5 pounds, It's not heavy.
Gotcha. Do you carry anything else? Do you carry water? Do you carry things of that nature?
I don't carry water hunting up here because all the water in these mountains, it's all spring water.
Gotcha.
And if I go to places like in Ontario, I've hunted that. Now that's flat country, and the water can run a long, long ways, and there's a lot of beaver. I do carry a bottle of water there.
Okay.
And then one of those, now they got those little straw things. You can screw it onto your water bottle. You can dip water and filter it,
Yep.
Those places, I'll carry one of those. But here I don't. Here in Adirondacks in New York, I don't either. Northern mountains up in New Hampshire, it's all spring water runs out of the mountains. That being said, I don't just drink it anywhere. I make sure it's, a little gravel trickle coming out of the side or something where I know it's good spring water.
Gotcha. So you just naturally find the good, clean drinking water.
Yep. Been doing it all my life.
No kidding. And never gotten sick or anything like that?
I've only had Giardia twice. And both times it wasn't. It's because I've had Giardia twice. I laugh about it, but I knew a good chance I'd get it because I drank water that I knew not to drink. But both times it was the end of the day, and I'd been tracking all day, and it was snow that turned to rain, and the rain was melting the snow and washing things through the woods. And I I drank where, even though they were trickles where normally they'd be good, they were awash with that runoff. And here, where you get Giardia more from moose, it's in the moose dung. That's all through the woods.
No kidding.
Yeah, but I'm aware of it, and I knew it both times. I said I shouldn't drink this water, but I was just so exhausted from not having any water all day that I had to take my chances on it. And I've drank in water that was questionable more than that, but both of those times I said to myself, this ain't good,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not good. What kind of firearm are you packing on these missions?
I use a 7600, a Remington 7600 carbine, and I don't use a scope. I've got a Williams peep sight on it. I take the aperture right out, and I just shoot through the threaded hole, and I paint my bead orange, and that's it. It's light, it's fast, weighs whatever, 6 pounds or whatever. I don't use a sling. I carry it in my hand or cradle it in my arm or vice versa, or, I move it around different ways. But I'll be carrying it because sometimes the shots are so quick. If you got a sling on or you're fooling with something uncomfortable, you're not going to get a chance, A scope is, if you're tracking in the snow, or even if it's not snowing, but there's snow in the trees, your scope's forever got snow in it. You're trying to wipe it out. And it's never worked. I tried it in the beginning because I had used a scope some in southern Maine when I was younger, but as soon as I got up here and started getting serious, I realized right quick that wasn't the way to go, and just went the other way and worked fine for me.
What made you say that the scope's not the way to go?
Well, because you're always fooling with it. If you're tracking, I'm saying it's not necessarily the way to go. And I realize some people do use them, but for me, it was more of a pain to try to keep it clear, because you can duck under a fir tree and then snow falls down and you load up on your scope, and then you got to wipe it out, and then you've got water spots in it, and then if it's the right temperature, then that freezes on and glazes over, so it becomes useless.
Makes sense.
So yeah, and when you're tracking in the woods, you're not going to get a long shot anyways.
Right.
I've been hunting up here, and I've hunted lots of places from Montana to Michigan and Ontario. The furthest I have ever shot a buck in the woods is 120 paces. I've never shot a deer beyond that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's some pretty tight quarters that you're sneaking into.
Well, yeah, I've shot a lot of them I shot a couple at 19 paces. I shot one laying in its bed at 19 paces, and I've shot another one that was, jumping by at 19 paces. And I probably shot them maybe even a little closer, but I'd say my average shot, if I had to average them all out, are probably 30 to 50 yards, mostly,
Well, that's excellent.
Be about an average.
Good deal.
So really no advantage with a scope.
Right, for sure. Well, we got into your gear, we got into your attire, and let's get into a hunt, Jay. Let's take him on a hunt. Where are we headed?
Definitely. I assume we're going to Maine, probably Jackman. Before we get into that, Hal, I had two quick questions. What are the percentage odds of you getting a shot at a deer in the woods every time you go out? What are the odds of you actually having that encounter?
Oh, that's not a high percentage of getting a shot every time. You just have to do it enough so the law of averages comes around you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because when I get on a track, I always expect that I'm going to get that deer, because if you don't expect to, you never will, right?
Right.
So you got to be prepared for it. But it's funny because there's really the conditions are everything. Now, you can have snow, but it doesn't mean it's good tracking snow. Quite frankly, there's more bad tracking snow than there is good tracking snow. If you've got noisy snow like a crust, your odds of getting a shot on them days or getting close enough is not very high. You still got to go and try it because there's always a chance, but those are low percentage days.
Right.
If it's a clear day, it could be nice powdery snow that seems quiet. It's 0 degrees, not a breath of wind. Those are going to be another hard chance, a lower percentage day in the woods. Now, if you're out around cuts or something where you can see further, your percentage are better, but usually you're not. So it's just because everything, when it's so quiet, every little, at 0, every little blade of grass or raspberry bush is snapping.
Yeah.
Very hard to be quiet. The best days, I call them deer killing days, are wind. If you got a windy day, the snow can actually be a little noisy on a windy day. Because the one thing the wind does for you is it's taking away all their senses, right?
Right.
They're not going to smell you because the wind's gusting around. Everything is moving in the woods, the trees are moving around, leaves are flicking around.
Yep.
They don't see you as good. So really the odds become, they're never in your favor, but your high percentage odds are on those type of days.
Okay.
They really are. Those are the kind of days when you're probably going to get. I expect on those days, if I can catch up to one, I'm going to get a shot.
Gotcha.
But we hunt all season in hopes of getting that chance, and at the right one. For me now, I know everybody's at their own level, and you just got to start somewhere. And I did. I started way back trying to figure it all out. It took me 7 years to shoot my first buck tracking. So everybody starts at a point. But now, for me to go out and track a buck and just any buck and shoot it is fairly easy. Not to make it sound simple, but just for any type of buck, it's easy.
Okay.
So that's why I like to hunt for those old mature bucks that are a little bit smarter.
Gotcha.
More of a challenge.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. All right, now let's go on that memorable deer hunt. Do you have one in mind that kind of sticks out in your head that might be a recent hunt or just one that's overall your favorite hunt of all time?
Well, I'll tell you one. I don't have any. To me, they're all special. Every buck is special. I name them, and they're all special in one way or the other. Yeah. And quite frankly, I don't like it to be too easy because and usually it doesn't happen that way for me. I hear a lot of stories from other hunters. I like telling stories, but quite frankly, I hear these stories and I'm like, well, that never happens to me. They walk in the woods on a track from the road and the buck's standing there looking at them 100 yards away. That's never happened to me. But
right.
And I don't want it to really.
Right.
It's not much of a story, but it's I got kind of a unique story that it's only happened to me once in all the years I've been tracking bucks, where the buck made a complete loop before I caught up to it. Now, quite often, if you jump a buck in the morning, by the end of the day, you might have gone 10 miles and you're right back about where you started from. I've done that many a times. But I'll tell you about this one. Would have been the year before last, 2015.
Okay.
And again, I had to leave here because we got snow. Usually where I live up here in Jackman, it's along the border in those mountains. And usually we always have the early snow, the first snows. It's just generally that way. We got the elevation and it's snow country.
Yeah.
But 2 years ago, it was terrible. There was no snow, and I mean there was no snow anywhere. I was watching Montana, Ontario, all the places that I could go and nowhere to hunt. And there was no snow anywhere in the country. And it was getting later in the season. And finally, Sunday of Thanksgiving week, which is the last week of rifle, they were calling for this storm to come in on the eastern side of the state on the New Brunswick border. And they were talking about it just hugging the border. And I said, well, I can go over there probably. So I watched it. I made plans to go over called a couple buddies and told them about it. So we're going to meet up over there. Well, that storm ended up moving in a little further than they predicted. So it came, probably if you split the state north-south in the middle, it came about to the middle in the northern half, like the northeastern corner.
Yep.
And so anyways, we got over there and I never hunted there before. I scouted around one day. I got there in the afternoon and just drove some roads kind of scouting, but nothing had moved because it just quit snowing. And then it had warmed up some. It was about 6 inches of snow, and it had warmed up. And the next morning it was froze back up, and we had one of those crusts.
Yep.
So I tracked a buck on that all day, and my buddy did, but I caught up to mine, but it was so noisy I couldn't get a look at him. So the next day, one of my other buddies had headed a little more west. There was less snow. There was only like inch or two of snow, but it was powdery. It hadn't thawed out. So the next day we went over that way, and I got actually on driving in, we found a track from the road, a buck following a doe, and I put my buddy on that, and I drove around. I'd never been there, so I'm trying to get a lay of the land a little bit. I had my DeLorme Atlas out, kind of looking at the road system, and I checked out one place. There was a gate, and I walked in behind that, no tracks. I come back out, and I walked into another. I drove in a road, one of those winter roads that there was no activity on, and I found a track, and it went down in, and by now it was afternoon, and I went down in I'm making this story short. I found a bunch of pocketed deer down in this piece of woods that was probably 2 miles by 3 miles long with no road. So I made plans for the next day. I was going to head back in there. I said, and it was going to be the last day of snow because it was supposed to warm up that day in the 40s and melt off. So I got there early in the morning, drove up in this little side road. I come in from a different direction, and I headed into the woods, and I picked this track up a quarter of a mile from the truck. Couldn't believe it. I mean, that's just luck sometimes.
Right.
And it was actually made fairly fresh. It was I figured it wasn't more than an hour old. So I got on that track, and it went up in, and it come into some other tracks, and there was a bunch of old tracks, and then it turned left, and then there was another track coming to the right. I took it, and then he went east for a long way, a mile or so, turned north approximately a mile, and he was making scrapes and rubs along the way. You know, he was searching during the day there. And that's a time when I'm thinking, if he's on his feet, that's the easiest time to kill a buck, because he's up and moving. You got a better chance of seeing him than if he's laying in his bed staring at his back track.
Right.
So I'm hurrying along on it pretty good, keeping track of it, what he's doing, and then he turns back to the west, another mile or so, and then he swings back to the south. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's I know he's making a big circle, because I'm back beyond where I started from, but he's headed back down in near beyond where I started, but back to the south. So, and again, I'm hurrying along because the snow's melting now. I'm trying to catch him on his feet, and I stumbled right onto him. He'd laid down like he never fed or he never did what you'd think, but which is common at the end of the season. They're just frantically trying to find another doe, and they just walk a lot, and then they just plop down. That's just what he did. He never had an indication, and he laid down in a stupid place for one to lay down. It's kind of thick hardwoods, but I never saw him go up. I was just going along quickly, and I didn't see him go. Come to his bed, kind of kicking myself about that, jumping him, you know. I looked at my watch. It was 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'd been on him, 3.5 hours. And I always wait. When I first jump a buck, almost every time I'll wait a half an hour, because what he's going to do usually is go off a little ways and stand there and wait to see if something's going to follow him. Because a lot of times they don't know what jumped them. They say movement in the woods, or they hear a stick snap, and they're just trying to get out of the way. But I was eating my sandwich, going to wait a half an hour, and I kept looking at the snow, and I'm like, this snow isn't going to last a long time. So I said, I ate, I looked at my watch, I waited 15 minutes, and I said, probably he's going to be trying to look back still, so I'm going to go easy on it. So I started on the track, and he was jumping, and I just went easy on it, and he went out, and he headed back to the east. And when I checked my GPS when I was eating my sandwich, I was a half a mile from my truck, and he was headed towards the truck, that direction, easterly direction. So anyway, I start on it, slowly going along and looking. I had both hands on my gun, like kind of at the ready, you know.
Yeah.
And he kind of went out into some hardwoods with some short spruce and fir in it, and he kind of ran, and he was still jumping, and then I see he was slowing down and kind of made a corner, and he turned up into the firs a little bit. And I looked, and I was watching out ahead of me, and I saw antlers move in those firs. And the first thing I thought of was it was probably a moose, because it was real dark. I could just see a dark object in antlers.
Yeah.
And that's, up north it's common. You usually see more moose than you do deer anyways, you know.
Yeah.
So I grabbed my binoculars out of my jacket. I picked my binoculars up, and I looked. As soon as I got them focused, I said, no, that's him. Threw them back in my jacket, and I pulled up, and I could just see from behind his shoulder. I couldn't see his shoulder. It was behind a tree, so I just pulled in as tight as I could and fired, and he disappeared. So I ran up. I was running up there, and I look, and because it was all those short firs about, waist high to head high.
Yeah.
And he's running up through the hardwoods there, so I stopped, and just before he turned out of sight, he stopped up in there, and I fired again, and I saw him go down. So then when I moved over to see where he was, I knew I hit him the first time because he dropped right down, but I could see where he pushed himself around. It was all blood, and there was a good blood trail up through the woods. I never did hit him the second shot. He was that's as far as he could go, and he keeled over.
Gotcha.
And so when I was doing my thing afterwards and getting pictures, I checked my GPS again, and I was 1/4 of a mile from my truck. And I was 100 yards. I was 100 yards from where I picked the track up in the morning.
No way.
4 hours before. And I was probably 20 to 30 yards from where he had come up through that same piece of hardwoods in the morning to where I had just picked it up above. And it was at the end of an old truck road through the woods you can't drive on. So the best part of it was I just had to drag him up a little grade there, 100 yards onto that little old road there, and whistled him right out to the truck. I was out the truck. I had him pictures taken, video done, gutted, drug out, and I was at the truck at, I think, 1 o'clock. I shot him. It must have been 11:30.
So he kind of did just a big circle.
Yeah, and like on his own, which is strange. They don't usually. I mean, it was a big circle, but it's in big buck territory. It wasn't a big circle,
right?
Because those bucks usually, when they're making a circle, that's their route through their territory, and it might be miles and miles in one direction.
Right. Gotcha.
So.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of unique and kind of memorable.
That's a good story.
It was a nice buck. It was Thanksgiving Day, and that buck was a nice 8-pointer, but he'd lost his weight. He weighed 195 Thanksgiving Day.
Yep. Wow.
So a week or so early, he'd addressed over 200. But that I knew when I got on him, that's the type of track it was. It was one of them around 200 pounds.
No kidding. That's an awesome story, Hal. That's very good. Do you ever lose a track?
The only way you can, I tell this to people all the time when I do seminars, you can't lose a track unless the snow melts,
Yeah.
It's still there somewhere, right?
Right.
So you don't lose it, you give up on it.
Okay.
And no, I've never given up on one. I can always find it somewhere. I might have to make a big circle. If it gets in, usually people give up on them when they get tangled in a bunch of other deer.
Yeah.
Or they get back and forth and around because they're trying to stay on that one track. I don't even do that. I just circle the whole area and pick up the track where it comes out of it.
Gotcha.
That's the way I sort through the tracks,
So the mini circles help you get back on the track you want.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you got to do it when there's patches. A lot of times your snow is melting or there's a lot of bare ground patches. It might go into a piece of bare ground. I'll just take the edge of it where I can see some snow and just pick it up where it comes out.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
Very,
Sometimes they'll go into a stream. I've seen bucks go into a stream and they'll walk a quarter of a mile or more in the stream and then jump back out, keep going. It's there. I mean, like I said again, people will give up on them when they do things like that. But then that's why deer escape, right? They do that because they've escaped from coyotes, and they'll escape from most hunters that way because most hunters won't either figure it out or they won't put the time in to do it. They just quit on it,
Gotcha. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Dusty, you want to go through the 10 rapid fire questions?
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. I'm always down for the 10 rapid fire. I don't get this very often,
All right, very cool.
We're going to start out with the first question is going to be your best hunting tip.
Never give up. I always tell people persistence will make up for any shortcoming you have any other way.
Very good. I'm going to add a question. What is your best tracking tip?
I would say the best tip I've given people was that wait a half an hour after you jump a buck to let them settle down. I've got stacks of letters and emails from people that once I wrote my first book and talked about that, they killed their first big bucks doing that. Even guys that had been hunting for years and tracked a lot, they'd never thought about doing that, and lots of bucks have been killed because of that.
Very good. What is one thing that you cannot go hunting without, and that's not your firearm?
I would say the one thing really is my belt pack with all my essentials in it. Now, that's not one thing, but if I got my pack, I know I've got everything I need to hunt all day, and I'm prepared to stay all night if I, for some reason, had to.
All right, makes sense for sure. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Laziness.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah,
you can put it any way you want, but that counts for a lot of stuff.
Right.
How old are you today?
Today, I am 59. In a couple of months, I'll be 60.
What would 59-year-old you, looking back now, what you know, and then looking back, what would you tell the 25-year-old you?
I would tell my 25-year-old self to enjoy it all you can. Enjoy life and enjoy things all you can while you're young, because it doesn't get any easier when you get older.
Yeah, that's a very good thing to tell yourself for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You meet a stranger, let's say at a convention or in the elevator, and they ask what you do for a living. What do you say?
I always told them I was a guide and outfitter.
Gotcha.
I've retired from that basically the last couple of years, but that's what I've always told people.
Very
now
good.
I guess I'll tell people I work for Remington, run my big woods business, and I hunt.
Yeah, that's the dream life right there,
That's a good one.
Yeah.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I didn't really have breakfast. this time of year, I try to only eat 2 meals a day because I try to keep in shape year-round for hunting. I don't want to gain any weight in the winter. So if I do have, some days I do have breakfast and I skip lunch. But today I had a lunch, which was some hamburger and gravy and rice. Something I pulled out of the refrigerator, leftovers.
Very good. You get your own billboard. It's a blank canvas. What would it say on that billboard? If you could put anything on a billboard, what would it say?
I did it my way.
Very good. I like that.
Anybody that knows me my wife's upstairs and she laughed when I said that. Anybody that hangs around me knows that. It's always been my way or the highway.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, I've moderated that. I'm willing to listen a little bit more to other points of view now.
Right. For sure. I say the word successful. Who's the first person that pops in your head and why?
I'm going to give a kudos to Jim Shockey because I've followed his stuff for years back when he was writing shock therapy in Field and Stream or whatever it was. I've met Jim, talked to him quite a few times at shows and stuff, but he's chased his dream all his life and become successful at doing what he likes to do.
Very good. That's a great person to think of. What's a day in your life look like? Give us a rundown of your day.
Ooh, depends on the time of year, really.
Let's just say right now.
Right now, my life is a little bit slower. I do a lot of gun testing and stuff for Remington, and since it's winter, we're not doing as much of that. But so I get up in the morning. Right now, I'm writing another book, so I get up in the morning and I get some writing time in before it gets too hectic. Not that it's hectic here, but I get my thoughts. My wife doesn't get up as early as me, and I sit down and write, take care of my emails, that type of stuff for both Remington stuff and my Big Woods business. Have lunch, get outside. I always get outside every day. Today I went out and it warmed up a little bit, so I was able to chip a little ice off the decks and stuff. And went to town, got the mail. Easy day today, really. Some days it's plowing snow or shoveling snow, and then I come in and relax in the evening. Once it gets dark, I relax, check emails again, do paperwork, and that's about it. Once in a while, I'll get out and, we've been doing some coyote hunting with the hounds. I don't have the hounds, so I got to wait till the guys. I'll go do that. But other than that, got a few shows to do this winter, trade shows.
Very good.
And then come spring, I'll get active again. I'll get outside and start doing some scouting, teaching my deer school, and get back on track, testing guns, whatever.
What's a hunting day? For the last question, what's a hunting day in your life look like?
Okay, that's an easy one. So a hunting day, or you can call it just still hunting, or if it's tracking, but basically I'm up at a couple hours before daylight, get breakfast, pack my lunch, and usually, quite often, I don't know where I'm going until I get up in the morning, because a lot of times it depends on what the weather did in the night and how I feel about a certain place might be, or sometimes it might be snow, high elevation, or whatever. So, and then I just strike off to a place I want to go hunt and hit the woods and go. And then I don't come out. I plan on being back out at dark, and depends how the day goes. Some days you're walking out 2 hours to get back out. But I like to be back at the truck by dark. Back when I was younger, I could walk out in the dark or hit the road 3-4 miles from the truck and walk back. But as I get older, I kind of like to be back around the truck when it's getting dark and get back and get some good supper and get rested up for the next day. Got to get 8 hours sleep. Got to rest your body to get to hunt right,
Right.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great day in the hunting life of you. Well, that wraps it up. My 11 rapid fire questions that I had for you.
Oh, you got an extra one in there. Very nice. So, Hal, you mentioned that you're writing a book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've written 2, and they're both of those books. They're called Big Woods Bucks, and a lot of stories. I like to teach with stories, so those books are like that. This one here is going to be strictly a storybook, and the story will be in the technique of the story, or tactics will all be within the stories of how I got a particular buck.
Gotcha.
There'll be something to learn in the story. And so that's what it's going to be about. A little bit, there'll be a little introduction and a preface about what we just talked about with the system, about you kind of covered it. You know, it's the system. My system really is, it starts out with, you know, navigation. We didn't talk about that, but that's the biggest obstacle people hunting in the big woods is the fear. They're scared of the big woods, and most of the fear is getting lost. But then the secondary fear is, I think, fear of being in the woods after dark, which, again, that could kind of come with being lost because you're more likely to be lost if you're in there after dark. But that's what keeps people from hunting in the big woods. And that's what keeps them from going very far. That's why they give up on a track. If that buck gets a half a mile away, they don't dare to go any further. So part of this system is learning navigation. You know, it's what keeps people from it. That's why I've had people ask me over the years, aren't you afraid you're teaching all these people how to hunt in the big woods that they're going to kill all the bucks? And I go, nope, because they're not going to do it. There's a very low percentage of people that'll actually do it. They like to read about it, hear about it, but you gotta break free into the woods to actually do it. You know,
right?
And it's at there's different levels of it. There's a lot of people that are content to go out and find a place to sit in the big woods, and that's a good way to hunt if they like to, or poke around and still hunt. But basically, to track, you got to be able to be comfortable in the woods and just set yourself free, because that buck is going to take you wherever he wants to. And if you're not willing to go, you're never going to be a tracker.
Right. How far out what's the furthest you've been out in the woods before you pulled the trigger and killed a deer and then had to drag it out?
Oh, well, I've been further when I never got one and had to walk back.
Gotcha.
I mean, I've had drags that were a couple of miles before.
Okay.
Because the one thing is, even though it's big woods up here in northern Maine, or you want to call northern New Hampshire, it's still, the further in you get, there's always going to be a road coming in from somewhere else. I mean, it's pretty well logged, the whole northern part of the state now, where there isn't places where you can get, 10 miles out anymore, or even probably 5.
So tell us where we can find your book when it comes out, and where can we find out more about you? My
book will be available on our website. It's bigwoodsbucks.com.
Very cool. Excellent.
All one word, bigwoodsbucks.com. We got a Facebook page, Big Woods Bucks.
Okay.
We got a young fellow that's on a team that's got us on Instagram now, so people can follow.
Whoa.
What I'm doing on Instagram.
Going big time with Instagram. Got it.
Yeah.
And
so my business, basically I have a business. I started the business after I wrote my first book, and it's called Big Woods Bucks, and I have a partner, Chris Dalty, in that business.
Okay.
And then we've got a team of guys, hunters, that contribute too, like a volunteer army, but they're all a bunch of good hunters, and we all film and that, and they write articles and all that stuff. So
very cool.
This part of our system, and what we do is teach other people how to hunt in the big woods. That's our mission. Make people better hunters and make people able to hunt in the big woods.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. And when can we expect the book?
Well, I will have it written probably in a month or so, and then it's just dependent on the publishing end of it. But I would say easily probably by spring.
Okay.
It should be out. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but it'll be something about big woods.
Gotcha. Well, Hal, this has been a pleasure and an absolute honor, and I sincerely enjoyed listening to you navigate through the big woods of Maine, and certainly will add a little playbook to my repertoire of deer hunting strategies. Can't thank you enough.
Hey, my pleasure too.
I know what Hal means when he says you can be intimidated by the big woods, and it's a little scary out there when you get very deep. And you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it back.
Come on, Jay, that ain't the case in New Hampshire or Maine or New York. Come on now, are you kidding me?
All right, I've been doing this long enough where it doesn't scare me, but I can definitely see where somebody who hasn't done this might be a bit intimidated.
I'm going to tell you from personal experience, the first time I ever walked into the New Hampshire woods, I was I was very intimidated, and the fact of the matter is that you guys sent me on some missions by myself, and I wasn't scared, but it was one of them things like, man, I tell you, there ain't nobody or nothing around if something happens here and I mess up, make the wrong turn. And then one time you guys sent me on a wild goose chase, and I tell you, I looked for a rock overlooking an open field for hours.
And it wasn't there.
It wasn't there at all. But, the big woods of, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, I'm an Ohio boy, and I got a lot of flat fields here where I'm at. And you get down to southeastern Ohio, you get into more rolling hills, but nothing like the mountains and big hills of New Hampshire, Maine, that area. It's amazing, and it's definitely intimidating. If you think you're a hunter, go hunt New Hampshire and see what it's all about.
Yeah, it's challenging, and I think probably the only true proven method is that you can kind of count on, kind of like in Ohio, you count on certain strategies. I think probably the only strategy you can kind of count on is a tracking mechanism where you are tracking a big buck in semi-deep, not even deep snow, but 6 inches of snow on a windy day when you're in an area where big bucks are living and you happen to cut that track. That's kind of what it's like. But I certainly understand what Hal means when the big woods are intimidating. My biggest fear when I bring somebody in who isn't from here is that they're going to go roaming and get lost, and then I can't find them.
Yeah, that's no doubt. I can definitely see where that's a fear.
Like, I'm not afraid of myself getting lost, even though it's entirely possible, but at least I kind of know how to get back out with my navigational tools, and Hal nailed it. It's all about navigation in the woods around here, and not even where I live, a little further north where things spread out a bit.
Yeah, it's just amazing how intimidating the woods are there. It almost overtakes your mind thinking that you're going to make a mistake and not find your way back out.
Right. And that's what you have to do to find some of these big, gnarly Maine or New Hampshire bucks that hide out in the big woods. They're independent creatures. They're very smart, and they know how to escape the predator like nobody's business. They're very wary, and they don't grow antlers nearly as big as they do where you live, but certainly they're every bit as skeptical about what's on their tail. So yeah, you got to be sharp, and you got to be ready, and you got to know the signs. And I loved how Hal described the stopping and the feeding aspect, where you have to be aware of that. So you're following the track, all of a sudden you see where they're starting to slow down and feed before they go to rest. Key indicator, and something that they don't always do, as Hal mentioned. But what a great system if you can get that system into your strategy if you are living and hunting in the Northeast.
Yeah, I learned a lot there, and I'm not hunting the Northeast. And I tell you what, if I get out there and you guys got snow, that you can definitely put that to work, no doubt about it.
Right, very much so. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Jay, we do, and going back into shed hunting again, that trail that you're walking in the woods. And
the Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
It's an active trail when you cross over it maybe, or you walk parallel to it in the woods, and there's always that big down tree that the deer jump over. That's another place that's kind of like the fence row of last week's tip. Check them down trees where they're crossing. They're going to jump them, and that natural jar of jumping over that tree, that down tree, will sometimes induce that antler to pop right off the skull plate and fall right to the ground. So down trees, creek crossings are another one when they hit big rocks as they jump, and it's something that's solid and they're jumping. If they got a loose antler, it's going to fall off, Jay.
Nice, great. Another place to look as you're following these trails is places where they're going to jar loose. That's a fantastic tip. Well, Dusty, it's been an absolute amazing week of travel for us, and we're just waiting for our plane to get here so we can take off to go back home, and things will get back to normal, and we'll be back next week, as we always are, with another great guest. And thanks for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. We really can't do it without you. And Dusty, where can we find you when we're not hanging out in Las Vegas?
Well, a few weeks ago, you could have found me in Ohio Whitetail Woods, but that's all done, and I filled my buck tag, so I guess you're going to have to shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. Look me up on Instagram @ChasingAntler or Facebook, Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Best place is j@bigbuckregistry.com. That's email. And if you'd like to come hang out with us over at the Big Buck Registry and hang out on our flagship Facebook page, it's bigbuckregistry.com/Facebook. Twitter is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. YouTube is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. And Instagram is instagram.com/bigbuckregistry. If you want to listen to this show, there are multiple ways to do it. You can find us on iHeartRadio. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Stitcher, on Blueberry, TuneIn Radio, a bunch of different places, anywhere podcasts are hanging out. So you can also find us on YouTube, where we convert our audio each and every week into a video. So if you don't have to, there's no real video to watch, but you can definitely get the audio there. So a great place to go. Is being one of those number one search engines, you can always find any of the content that we've produced right there as well. Well, Dusty, it's been another amazing show, and unfortunately it's time for us to go, but we will be back next week. My name is Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
This is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.